Nandi was a girl unlike any other in her small, sun-baked village. At 22, she carried a quiet intensity in her eyes that seemed to see beyond the familiar mud brick houses, the well-worn dirt paths, and the endless cycles of labor that marked the days of her neighbors. While others were content with the routines handed down from generation to generation, Nandi's mind danced with ideas that no one dared to speak aloud. She imagined soaring beyond the hills that bordered the village, seeing faraway lands, new ways to farm the fields, and inventions that could ease the lives of the people around her. Her dreams were not loud or ostentatious. They were delicate, glowing sparks that she nurtured quietly, yet they held a force that grew steadily with each passing day. But the village did not welcome dreamers like Nandi. The elders frowned at her audacity, warning that girls were meant to obey, to marry, to care for the home and the land, and that fanciful thinking was a waste, even a danger. Dreams, they said, are only for those who can afford to fail. The rest must live with their hands in the soil and their eyes on the ground. Even her own relatives, though bound by love, could not hide their skepticism. Her aunt would sigh as she watched Nandi sketch designs in the dirt with a stick, shaking her head at what she called childish nonsense. Her cousins whispered among themselves, laughing when Nandi described a new tool that could save hours of labor or a plan for a small school where children could learn beyond the village's modest lessons. "She thinks too much," they'd mutter. "She'll bring trouble upon herself." Despite the mockery and the cautionary words, Nandi remained unshaken. She had learned to listen more than she spoke, to observe the rhythms of life and find inspiration in its smallest corners. She watched the wind move through the trees, how the river curved past the village, and how the light shifted over the hills at sunrise. Every detail whispered ideas to her, and each observation fueled the quiet determination that had begun to take root in her heart. The villagers might dismiss her, might laugh or shake their heads, but they could not touch the vision she carried within. It was as if an invisible fire burned inside her, warming her even in the face of ridicule and doubt. At night, when the village rested, Nandi would sit by the small clay hearth in her home, her hands tracing sketches on scraps of paper hidden beneath the floorboards. She imagined water wheels turning with ease, rooftops that captured sunlight to warm the cold mornings, and gardens that could flourish without endless toil. She envisioned children learning to read by lamplight, women carrying baskets without strain, and her village thriving in ways no one else dared to dream. Each sketch was a rebellion, a quiet defiance of the limitations imposed upon her, and yet she shared them with no one. She understood the peril of being different, of speaking before one had power, and so she nurtured her dreams like a secret garden, growing strong and resilient in silence. Even as skepticism pressed against her from every corner, Nandi's spirit refused to bend. She noticed the villagers' small habits, their fears, and the way they clung to old ways, and from these she learned patience, strategy, and resilience. She realized that to survive, to truly bring her visions to life, she would need more than talent. She would need cunning, courage, and an unshakable belief in the unseen. Each day as she moved among the laughing faces, she planted seeds, not of crops but of ideas, of quiet influence, and of a hope that one day, her dreams would speak so loudly that even the most doubtful could not ignore them. Nandi's presence was subtle, almost ghostly to those around her, but her mind was a storm of possibility. The villagers saw only a quiet girl with ambitious eyes and a gentle demeanor, unaware that their laughter and doubt were forging a determination that could not be broken. Her dreams, dismissed as foolishness, were alive, growing like tendrils reaching for the sun, and no warning, mockery, or threat could sever them. In her silence, Nandi became a force waiting, patient and relentless, ready for the moment when her vision could no longer be contained and the world around her would be forced to reckon with the power of her imagination. Nandi was a girl unlike any other in her small, sun-baked village. At 22, she carried a quiet intensity in her eyes that seemed to see beyond the familiar mud brick houses, the well-worn dirt paths, and the endless cycles of labor that marked the days of her neighbors. While others were content with the routines handed down from generation to generation, Nandi's mind danced with ideas that no one dared to speak aloud. She imagined soaring beyond the hills that bordered the village, seeing faraway lands, new ways to farm the fields, and inventions that could ease the lives of the people around her. Her dreams were not loud or ostentatious. They were delicate, glowing sparks that she nurtured quietly, yet they held a force that grew steadily with each passing day. But the village did not welcome dreamers like Nandi. The elders frowned at her audacity, warning that girls were meant to obey, to marry, to care for the home and the land, and that fanciful thinking was a waste, even a danger. Dreams, they said, are only for those who can afford to fail. The rest must live with their hands in the soil and their eyes on the ground. Even her own relatives, though bound by love, could not hide their skepticism. Her aunt would sigh as she watched Nandi sketch designs in the dirt with a stick, shaking her head at what she called childish nonsense. Her cousins whispered among themselves, laughing when Nandi described a new tool that could save hours of labor or a plan for a small school where children could learn beyond the village's modest lessons. "She thinks too much," they'd mutter. "She'll bring trouble upon herself." Despite the mockery and the cautionary words, Nandi remained unshaken. She had learned to listen more than she spoke, to observe the rhythms of life and find inspiration in its smallest corners. She watched the wind move through the trees, how the river curved past the village, and how the light shifted over the hills at sunrise. Every detail whispered ideas to her, and each observation fueled the quiet determination that had begun to take root in her heart. The villagers might dismiss her, might laugh or shake their heads, but they could not touch the vision she carried within. It was as if an invisible fire burned inside her, warming her even in the face of ridicule and doubt. At night, when the village rested, Nandi would sit by the small clay hearth in her home, her hands tracing sketches on scraps of paper hidden beneath the floorboards. She imagined water wheels turning with ease, rooftops that captured sunlight to warm the cold mornings, and gardens that could flourish without endless toil. She envisioned children learning to read by lamplight, women carrying baskets without strain, and her village thriving in ways no one else dared to dream. Each sketch was a rebellion, a quiet defiance of the limitations imposed upon her, and yet she shared them with no one. She understood the peril of being different, of speaking before one had power, and so she nurtured her dreams like a secret garden, growing strong and resilient in silence. Even as skepticism pressed against her from every corner, Nandi's spirit refused to bend. She noticed the villagers' small habits, their fears, and the way they clung to old ways, and from these she learned patience, strategy, and resilience. She realized that to survive, to truly bring her visions to life, she would need more than talent. She would need cunning, courage, and an unshakable belief in the unseen. Each day as she moved among the laughing faces, she planted seeds, not of crops but of ideas, of quiet influence, and of a hope that one day, her dreams would speak so loudly that even the most doubtful could not ignore them. Nandi's presence was subtle, almost ghostly to those around her, but her mind was a storm of possibility. The villagers saw only a quiet girl with ambitious eyes and a gentle demeanor, unaware that their laughter and doubt were forging a determination that could not be broken. Her dreams, dismissed as foolishness, were alive, growing like tendrils reaching for the sun, and no warning, mockery, or threat could sever them. In her silence, Nandi became a force waiting, patient and relentless, ready for the moment when her vision could no longer be contained and the world around her would be forced to reckon with the power of her imagination. The villagers had always been quick to notice anything that deviated from tradition, and Nandi's dreams were the brightest deviation of all. Each time she spoke even a hint of her ideas, a ripple of laughter would follow, rolling through the small clusters of houses like an unstoppable wave. "She imagines herself a queen of the sky," one man would shout, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. "Or perhaps a builder of magic machines that grow crops overnight," another would scoff, his tone dripping with disbelief. Children mimicked her, repeating her words in sing-song tones, turning her visions into mockery. Even those who loved her, her mother, her aunts, her cousins, found it easier to laugh than to support, warning her gently that the world was not made for dreamers, especially young girls who were meant to marry, tend the fields, and obey the rhythms of life passed down through generations. Despite the scorn, Nandi did not falter outwardly. She smiled politely when ridicule came, nodding as if the laughter did not touch her, but inside she burned with a quiet intensity. She learned to hide her deepest aspirations beneath a veil of humility, speaking in riddles or half-truths, letting her mind wander freely while her lips remained constrained. In private, she sketched her inventions, wrote down her ideas, and mapped out worlds beyond the mountains that hemmed in the village. Each idea, each plan was carefully nurtured, protected from the harsh eyes that would never understand them. Her family's disapproval stung the most. Her mother, though kind, insisted that ambition brought danger. "Dream too far, and the wind will sweep you away," she warned. Her father, silent and stoic, frowned at her strange sketches scattered on the table, shaking his head without speaking. They could not see the life that shimmered inside her mind, the brilliant colors of possibilities, the patterns of the world she observed and understood in ways no one else did. To them, her ambitions were reckless, a distraction from the chores, the farm, the small, ordered life they had learned to accept. But Nandi, patient and persistent, knew that no laughter, no warning, could extinguish the spark that had ignited in her. The ridicule, rather than crushing her, sharpened her resolve. Each jeer became a challenge, each mocking whisper a reason to prove that vision alone held power. She found secret allies in the unnoticed corners of the village. A boy who collected herbs in silence, a grandmother who hummed forgotten songs, a wandering trader who told stories of distant lands. They believed in her, or at least in the strength of her spirit, and in their quiet approval she found courage. The laughter of the majority became a backdrop, a rhythm against which she trained her patience, fortitude, and ingenuity. Nandi understood the mechanics of mockery. Fear often hid beneath the surface, disguised as scorn. She watched the villagers carefully, noting the patterns in their eyes, the hesitation behind forced smiles. Their laughter was brittle, masking insecurity, and slowly she began to see that they feared not her childish ideas, but the potential that they contained. In the privacy of her room at night, she would whisper to herself, speaking aloud only in fragments, imagining the day when her visions would no longer be dismissed, when the very people who mocked her would see the truth she carried like fire. Even amidst scorn, Nandi's dreams thrived. Hidden, guarded, and nurtured in secrecy, they grew stronger each day, reaching toward a horizon that the villagers could not yet see, and perhaps never would, until the night arrived when laughter would give way to fear, and the power of her vision could no longer be ignored. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and the sky turned a deep indigo, the village seemed to settle into its usual rhythm. Fires glimmered in small homes, chickens clucked softly, and the wind whispered through the trees. Yet Nandi sensed something different. The air carried a charged energy, faint but undeniable, as though the night itself had awakened to her presence. She paused at the edge of the path leading to the river, her eyes catching glimmers of light that danced like tiny stars among the branches. At first she thought it might be the reflection of lanterns or the moon playing tricks, but the movements were too purposeful, too deliberate, as if the forest itself was signaling her. A soft hum rose from the woods, a sound no one else seemed to hear. The animals, normally accustomed to the gentle human activity of the village, behaved strangely. Birds perched silently on rooftops, their heads turning as if listening to a hidden rhythm. Dogs refused to follow their owners, staring intently at unseen forms moving just beyond the light of torches. Even the livestock stirred uneasily, their eyes reflecting a knowledge that humans could not perceive. The villagers noticed the oddity only briefly and dismissed it as superstition, shaking their heads and muttering about restless winds or mischievous spirits. Yet Nandi felt the pulse of it in her bones. These signs were not random, they were connected, subtle threads woven into the night, hinting at something greater, something she had always believed in. Nandi walked slowly toward the center of the village, letting her senses guide her. The wind seemed to bend around her, brushing past her ears in patterns that whispered half-formed words, warnings, and encouragements. Leaves swirled in spirals that she alone seemed to understand, forming shapes that echoed the sketches she had drawn in secrecy for months. She realized that the forest, the earth, the very air she breathed was responding to the life inside her, to the visions that others had mocked and dismissed. Her heart quickened, a mixture of awe and validation. For the first time, she saw tangible signs that the world might align with the dream she had carried quietly, defying ridicule and doubt. Despite the clear signals, the villagers remained oblivious. They joked about strange noises, attributing them to foxes or mischievous children. Torches flickered against the breeze, casting distorted shadows that made the elders shiver and whisper warnings about spirits and bad omens. But Nandi understood, these disturbances were neither malevolent nor random. They were messages, small yet potent, that confirmed her inner knowing. The universe, or the forest, or whatever force had always seemed distant, was acknowledging her vision. And she realized that her dreams, laughed at for so long, were not merely fantasies. They were threads of possibility, intertwined with forces far beyond the simple fears of the villagers. As the night deepened, the lights grew brighter, the whispers more insistent. A faint glow emanated from the riverbank, illuminating patterns in the water that mirrored Nandi's secret designs. She felt a connection she had never known, a flow of energy that both validated her foresight and urged her toward action. Every step she took seemed to leave a mark in the soil, a subtle impression that the wind carried silently to others, even if they could not yet interpret it. Animals followed, circling, guiding, and observing. Each element of the natural world seemed aligned with her purpose, quietly acknowledging the truths she held within. By dawn, Nandi returned to her small home, her mind alive with understanding. The villagers would continue to doubt, to mock, and to ignore these signs, but she knew that her dreams were awakening in ways that were unstoppable. The night had spoken to her, through whispers, lights, and creatures alike, revealing that the power of her vision was no longer contained within imagination alone. It had begun to manifest, subtle yet undeniable, and Nandi felt an exhilaration she had never known, the first true hint that her dreams could reshape the world around her, if only she had the courage to act. In the heart of the village, tucked away in a modest home overgrown with vines and shadowed by a cluster of ancient trees, lived Elder Thandi, a woman few paid attention to. Her hair had long turned silver, and the lines etched into her face told stories of decades that no one bothered to ask about. While others busied themselves with gossip, labor, or the ridicule of dreamers like Nandi, Thandi watched, quietly noting the subtle shifts in the world around her. She had always seen what others overlooked: the trembling leaves before a storm, the flicker of light that carried meaning, the size of the earth itself. She understood that life often spoke not in the loud proclamations that villagers valued, but in quiet signs and whispers that required attention, patience, and trust. When Nandi first approached her, hesitant and unsure whether to speak aloud about the strange events she had witnessed the night before, Thandi smiled knowingly. She had seen the same spark in many young dreamers who were too often dismissed or silenced. "You carry something the village does not yet understand," Thandi said softly, her voice carrying the weight of experience but also warmth and encouragement. "They may laugh at you, but your dreams are not empty. They are windows. Windows into possibilities that fear has tried to hide." Nandi listened, her heart beating faster with both relief and excitement. Here was someone who did not mock her visions or call them foolish, but who recognized the pulse of truth within them. Elder Thandi explained that dreams could hold more than desires. They could reveal hidden fears, long-buried secrets, and the potential paths that life itself might take. The unusual lights, the restless animals, the whispers of the wind, these were not accidents. They were signs, echoes of a reality shaped by forces far greater than the villagers' limited understanding. Nandi's imagination, her visions, were part of this intricate tapestry. "Trust what you see, Nandi," Thandi advised, her eyes steady and unflinching. "Do not doubt yourself because others cannot comprehend. Fear hides behind mockery, and they fear the truth that your dreams carry. Your mind is a compass, it can guide you through the unseen. But you must learn patience, observation, and courage. Only then will your visions transform from whispers into revelation." The elder handed Nandi a small bundle of herbs and a notebook with worn pages, symbols of guidance and record-keeping. "Record what you notice," Thandi said. "Mark the signs, follow the patterns. Dreams are fragile when ignored but powerful when nurtured. The night may speak in riddles, but your heart will understand." Nandi felt a swell of confidence she had never experienced. She realized that her dreams were not merely personal fantasies, but a force that could awaken the world around her. With Elder Thandi as her guide, she began to see that her visions held the seeds of change, and that trusting herself was the first step toward revealing truths the village had long refused to face. As the sun rose over the village, casting long shadows across the narrow paths and clay rooftops, Nandi moved quietly among the homes and market stalls. She carried herself with the calm of someone who knew something others did not, aware that every glance, every small movement, could send ripples through the lives of those who had once dismissed her. The villagers continued their morning routines, unaware that subtle forces were already at work. Nandi had begun leaving small signs, almost imperceptible, connected to the visions she had nurtured in secret. A carefully placed stone in the shape of a symbol she had seen in the night sky, a pattern in the firewood stacked outside a home, a feather laid atop a doorway, all mundane enough to escape casual attention, yet charged with meaning for those sensitive to change. At first, the villagers did not notice. Children ran past her, laughing and chasing one another, while elders bickered over petty matters. But as the day unfolded, the effects of her subtle interventions became apparent. A merchant who had mocked her the previous week found that his carefully arranged goods were shifted slightly, disrupting the rhythm he had relied on. He frowned, blaming the wind, yet a creeping unease began to settle over him. A group of young men who had laughed at Nandi's sketches of the mysterious lights, saw one of their cattle acting erratically, circling in tight patterns near the riverbank. The animal's behavior mirrored the strange movements Nandi had drawn days before. They exchanged nervous glances, their confidence faltering. Nandi observed from the shadows, noting each reaction. She understood that direct confrontation was unnecessary. Fear and uncertainty were more persuasive than argument. Her silence, once assumed to be weakness, now amplified the effect of her actions. Every subtle shift, every gentle nudge of fate, forced the villagers to reconsider what they believed possible. Where laughter had reigned, suspicion began to sprout. Where certainty had existed, doubt crept in. Even those who had previously dismissed her kindness and intelligence felt the first tremors of apprehension. In the village square, a set of birds arranged themselves in a curious pattern on the rooftops, as though responding to some unspoken rhythm. Nandi had noticed this behavior before and had encouraged it through small gestures, leaving crumbs in deliberate places, moving branches, or humming softly in tune with the wind. Now, villagers paused to watch, unsettled by the uncanny alignment, sensing something beyond coincidence. They whispered among themselves, trying to rationalize what they saw, yet the feeling of unease deepened. Children, always more perceptive than adults, were the first to respond openly. They began to mimic Nandi's movements, creating their own small patterns and marking the paths she had suggested. The elders scolded them, attributing it to play, but the patterns persisted, growing more elaborate and precise. Adults could not ignore them entirely. Each day brought a new alignment, a new disruption of expectation that hinted at a hidden order and a truth they had long ignored. It was as if the village itself was stirring, guided by forces they could not comprehend. By sunset, the once dismissive villagers were quiet and wary. Their laughter had faded into murmurs of concern, glances exchanged with unease. Nandi walked among them, her presence unnoticed yet felt. Every subtle sign she had left, every tremor of the village's natural rhythms, had begun to unravel the illusion of certainty they had held over her. The dreams they had mocked were no longer invisible, they were manifesting in ways the villagers could not dismiss. And as Nandi paused to watch the light fade behind the hills, she knew that these small tremors were only the beginning of a reckoning they had never anticipated. The seeds of fear, planted gently, were growing, and the truth of her visions was awakening with every silent step she took. "You said." The night fell over the village like a velvet curtain, thick and heavy, carrying a chill that hinted at something extraordinary. The moon rose, pale and luminous, casting silvery light across rooftops, fields, and the narrow winding paths that threaded through the community. There was an unusual stillness in the air, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. Nandi walked among the shadows, her heart steady, her mind attuned to the subtle vibrations she had sensed for days. She had known that this night would arrive, the night when the visions she had nurtured in secret would manifest, not as abstract dreams, but as undeniable truths the villagers could no longer ignore. At first, the signs were subtle, the kind that might be dismissed by anyone unobservant. A sudden breeze shifted the leaves in patterns that mirrored Nandi's sketches, carrying a faint whisper that seemed to speak directly to those who had doubted her. Animals stirred in uncanny ways. Dogs howled in unison atop the hills, cats prowled in synchrony, and birds circled overhead in formations that reflected the intricate design she had traced in her notebook. Each movement carried meaning, a silent confirmation of the visions she had held close to her heart. The villagers, who had once laughed at her and dismissed her insights, began to notice. Unease rippled through the crowd, and their laughter faltered, replaced by apprehensive murmurs. Then came the more dramatic signs. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally against walls, revealing hidden patterns and symbols long ignored. Small fires ignited spontaneously in hearts that had been neglected, illuminating messages and images that mirrored the warnings Nandi had sketched days before. A sudden crack of thunder punctuated the night, startling the villagers as lightning revealed glimpses of their own secrets. Whispered conversations, concealed quarrels, and misdeeds they had hoped would remain buried. Every revelation landed with precision, as though the night itself had been orchestrated to expose the truth. Nandi moved quietly through the village square, observing reactions. Eyes widened, hearts pounded, and voices faltered as disbelief clashed with undeniable reality. Families confronted their own complicity, elders faced the consequences of long-ignored injustices, and those who had mocked her visions now grappled with the impossibility of their dismissal. Yet Nandi did not speak. Her silence, once mistaken for weakness, now amplified the power of the night. Every effect, every supernatural manifestation, pointed to her insight, her foresight, and her unyielding courage. The villagers' fear transformed into awe as they realized that this young dreamer had been right all along. By the time the moon reached its zenith, the village had shifted irrevocably. The air buzzed with a strange energy, a combination of fear, reverence, and awakening. Even the most skeptical elders could not ignore what had occurred. Nandi's dreams, once laughed at and scorned, had materialized in tangible, undeniable ways. Every pattern, every symbol, every whispered message confirmed the depth of her vision. The villagers were no longer merely witnesses. They were participants in a revelation that challenged their assumptions, their authority, and their understanding of the world. As dawn approached, the first hints of light brushing the horizon, Nandi stood quietly at the edge of the square, her eyes calm and steady. The villagers, exhausted yet transformed, looked upon her with a mixture of respect, fear, and awe. The night had spoken, and in its voice, Nandi's dreams had become reality. Her visions had shattered disbelief, validated hope, and exposed truths that no one could deny. In that moment, the village understood that their mockery had been premature, their fear had been misplaced, and the young dreamer they had laughed at had been the catalyst for a night they would never forget. The power of Nandi's insight had arrived, unstoppable and undeniable, and the village would never view her, or her dreams, the same way again. As dawn broke, spilling golden light across the village, the remnants of the previous night's revelations hung in the air like a tangible presence. Villagers moved cautiously, their faces etched with disbelief, awe, and a deep, unspoken respect. Nandi stood quietly at the edge of the square, observing without a word. Her dreams, long dismissed as fanciful and naive, had spoken with clarity during the night, leaving traces and signs that communicated far more than mere words ever could. The winds had carried whispers of caution, the patterns of birds had illustrated hidden alliances, and the firelight had revealed truths that the villagers could no longer ignore. Every detail of her visions had materialized, offering lessons that penetrated stubborn hearts and challenged rigid minds. Those who had mocked Nandi could not escape the consequences of their derision. A mother who had laughed at her daughter's imaginative sketches now saw her own household subtly rearranged, objects shifted in ways that highlighted neglect and selfishness. A group of young men, once dismissive of her insights, discovered that the missteps they had blamed on chance had been guided by the symbols and alignments Nandi had quietly left behind. The village's skepticism and ridicule, once wielded as shields against her influence, had been turned inward, reflecting the folly of their judgment. Each person could feel the weight of their previous mockery, a tangible reminder that dreams held power far beyond surface appearances. Nandi's visions did not only reveal fault, they communicated guidance and wisdom. Paths once hidden in the forest, places where water ran pure or herbs grew with healing properties, were highlighted through subtle signs, fallen branches, unusual bird calls, or the alignment of stones along familiar paths. Villagers who followed these markers found sustenance, aid, and sometimes even a small revelation about their own lives. It was as if the dreams themselves had become a language, translating the unseen into patterns the world could understand. Every manifestation carried meaning, teaching lessons about respect, caution, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. Even the elders, who had held the loudest voices and the strongest authority, were humbled. They could no longer rely on fear or tradition alone. Nandi's dreams demonstrated that true power lay not in command, but in understanding, observation, and foresight. The lessons embedded in her visions resonated deeply. Arrogance and mockery invited consequences, while attentiveness and openness nurtured growth. Children who had always watched her quietly began to recognize the importance of imagination, curiosity, and the courage to pursue one's visions despite ridicule. By the end of the day, the village had shifted subtly but permanently. Laughter no longer masked condescension, whispers no longer concealed fear. Nandi's dreams had spoken, and the villagers had listened, not through conversation but through evidence, experience, and the undeniable truth laid bare before them. Her visions had communicated what words could not, that insight, courage, and quiet determination carry a weight that no amount of mockery can diminish. The young dreamer, once dismissed and scorned, had become the vessel through which the village learned to see, to reflect, and to respect the unseen power of dreams. The village awoke to a new reality, one that had crept in under the cover of night but now pressed upon every heart with undeniable weight. The air, once filled with the careless chatter and laughter that had accompanied Nandi's dreams, now carried an unmistakable tension. People moved cautiously, casting wary glances at one another, as if the very earth beneath them had shifted. The laughter that had once mocked Nandi was replaced by a gnawing fear, a collective acknowledgement that something far greater than themselves had been present all along, something they had ignored, belittled, and dismissed. Nandi's dreams, once considered childish fantasies, had manifested in ways that were not only tangible but powerful enough to disrupt the familiar order of the village. It began subtly. Walls seemed narrower, shadows longer, and ordinary objects hinted at meanings the villagers had never noticed before. Birds perched in unusual patterns, animals avoided certain paths, and the wind carried whispers that seemed to echo the truths Nandi had always spoken in her visions. Those who had laughed at her could no longer claim ignorance. They felt the undeniable weight of insight pressing on them, forcing them to confront not just Nandi's power but their own shortcomings, fear, mockery, and the unwillingness to embrace change. The elders, once proud and imperious, felt their authority trembling. The symbols, signs, and sequences revealed during the previous night were not merely coincidence. They were deliberate, precise manifestations of understanding and foresight that no one else possessed. The realization struck hard. Their fear of change, their insistence on tradition and control, had blinded them. They had underestimated the strength of imagination and insight, believing that loud voices and rigid rules could contain a spirit as vibrant and visionary as Nandi's. Even the children, once silent observers, began to sense the shift. The subtle tremors in the ground, the unusual alignment of the stars, the whispering wind, they all carried a lesson. The fear was not born from malice but from awe. The villagers now recognized that true vision cannot be contained by laughter, ridicule, or dismissal. It demands attention, respect, and sometimes humility. Every corner of the village seemed to vibrate with the evidence of Nandi's insight, and each revelation magnified the terror of those who had once scorned her. As the day progressed, the village came to understand that their fear had been both justified and misplaced. They feared the unknown, feared ambition, feared the disruption of their routines, but they had misjudged the source. Nandi's dreams were not destructive, they were transformative. Her vision held power, yes, but it was a power that revealed truth and possibility rather than chaos. The realization settled like a stone in the hearts of the villagers. Their own narrow-mindedness had been the root of the problem. They had feared what they did not understand, laughed at what they could not see, and in doing so, underestimated the very force that would redefine their lives. By evening, the village had changed irrevocably. The laughter that had once punctuated the air was gone, replaced by a reverent silence. Every gaze that met Nandi's carried acknowledgement, fear intertwined with respect. She was no longer merely the dreamer they had mocked. She was the keeper of insight, the embodiment of vision, and a living reminder that imagination, courage, and understanding are forces no village can afford to ignore. In that quiet terror, they understood the truth. The dreams they had laughed at had always been more powerful than their fears. As the villagers grappled with the undeniable power of Nandi's dreams, a subtle shift began to take shape. Among them were those who had quietly believed in her from the start, the ones who had seen her determination, her courage, and the depth of her vision even when others mocked her. They had not spoken loudly, nor had they acted openly, but their faith in her abilities had never wavered. Now, in the wake of the night's revelations, these quiet supporters stepped forward, emboldened by the undeniable proof of Nandi's insight and the awe that gripped the village. They gathered around her in small groups, their eyes bright with admiration and respect. Some had skills that complemented her dreams, artisans, storytellers, and keepers of old knowledge, while others offered wisdom, courage, or leadership. Together, they formed a subtle but powerful network, united by the recognition that imagination, courage, and foresight were forces capable of reshaping their world. Their alliance was not about confrontation but about cultivation. They sought to nurture creativity, encourage courage, and give voice to visions that had long been silenced. As word spread of their emergence, more villagers began to reconsider their attitudes. Children who had watched Nandi in secret felt emboldened to explore their own dreams. Adults who had doubted or derided her slowly acknowledged the value of curiosity, imagination, and courage. The movement was gentle but inexorable, like a tide reshaping the shore, and it brought a new energy into the village. Conversations changed. Mockery was replaced with questions and exploration. Ideas that had been dismissed as foolish were now discussed openly, debated thoughtfully, and celebrated when they bore fruit. Together, Nandi and her allies began to reshape not only the mindset but the very rhythm of daily life. Festivals incorporated new art forms inspired by her visions, learning circles were formed to nurture creative skills, and spaces once dominated by rigid traditions became places of dialogue and discovery. Even the elders, humbled by the previous night's revelations, began to see value in guidance rather than strict control. They recognized that Nandi's courage and insight were not threats to their authority but opportunities to transform the village into a community capable of growth, imagination, and resilience. By the end of the day, it was clear that Nandi's journey had inspired more than awe. It had sparked a quiet revolution of thought and practice. Those who had once mocked her now watched in wonder as the village slowly shifted toward honoring creativity, courage, and vision. The dreamer and her allies had become catalysts for change, demonstrating that belief, support, and action, when combined with insight and bravery, could reshape an entire community. The message was unmistakable. When courage and imagination are nurtured, even the smallest spark can ignite a fire capable of transforming the world around it. You said. The village had not yet settled after the revelations of Nandi's visions. While some quietly admired her courage and joined in reshaping the community, others, the mockers, the skeptics, the harsh critics, could no longer hide from the consequences of their disbelief. Their ridicule, once tolerated as harmless gossip or light-hearted jest, now appeared in sharp relief against the proof of Nandi's insight. Every whispered insult, every sneer, and every act of dismissal now weighed heavily upon them, leaving a lingering sense of shame and unease that they could neither deny nor escape. At first, the consequences were subtle. Conversations that once carried laughter at Nandi's expense now faltered when she entered the room. Villagers began to realize that their mockery had revealed more about their limitations than about her abilities. When disputes arose or decisions needed wisdom, it was Nandi whom the community turned to, rather than the ones who had scoffed at her. Their influence diminished as the village slowly recognized that intelligence, courage, and foresight were more valuable than conformity and ridicule. The shift extended beyond personal embarrassment. Those who had once doubted her began to see the social structures of the village reshaping in response to her vision. Elders and leaders who had relied on unquestioned authority were challenged by the emerging respect for Nandi. Her insight into people's behavior, her foresight, and her ability to interpret signs and dreams allowed her to mediate conflicts, guide decisions, and propose solutions that no one else could see. It became increasingly evident that her so-called impractical dreams had practical power, and the villagers who had ignored her realized their previous attitudes had limited not only her potential but the potential of the entire community. Some of the former mockers tried to regain favor or assert their old influence, but their efforts were met with polite disregard or quiet resistance. They saw their peers turning toward Nandi, seeking her guidance, celebrating her courage and learning from her example. Their reputations, once built on condescension or social dominance, crumbled under the weight of her proven vision. Children and young adults in particular began to model themselves after her, choosing curiosity over conformity, action over apathy, and dreams over dismissal. By the end of the week, the social landscape of the village had transformed. Nandi was no longer merely a dreamer, she was a recognized leader and a symbol of courage, wisdom, and imagination. Her foresight and bravery inspired a new cultural norm: to value vision, to listen before dismissing, and to respect those who dared to dream beyond the limits imposed by tradition. The consequences for those who had doubted her were clear, not in punishment but in the quiet, undeniable recognition of their error and the shift of influence toward someone who had been underestimated for far too long. The reckoning of doubt was complete, and Nandi's legacy began to ripple across the village, setting a new standard for courage, insight, and the power of daring to dream. The transformation in the village did not happen overnight, but it grew steadily, like the first light of dawn spreading over the hills. Following the reckoning of doubt, people began to reflect on their previous attitudes, realizing that their fear of imagination and ambition had limited not only Nandi but the potential of the entire community. Slowly, the villagers started to understand that insight, vision, and courage were not threats to tradition. They were the very forces that could strengthen and enrich it. Children became the first and most enthusiastic beneficiaries of this shift. No longer chastised for asking impossible questions or imagining wondrous futures, they were encouraged to explore, create, and learn. Schools and learning spaces adapted, incorporating storytelling, art, and exercises in critical thinking and problem-solving. Villagers who once scoffed at Nandi's visions now guided the young ones to nurture their curiosity. The energy of possibility spread, replacing the old culture of ridicule with one of encouragement, inquiry, and wonder. Adults too began to change. Farmers, artisans, and community leaders experimented with new methods inspired by ideas Nandi had proposed. Where before tradition had been the unquestioned law, innovation now held value. Community gatherings shifted from forums of judgment and gossip to spaces for discussion, collaboration, and shared vision. Even the elders, initially reluctant to embrace the changes, witnessed tangible benefits: increased productivity, stronger social bonds, and a renewed sense of purpose among the youth. The culture of ridicule, which had once been deeply ingrained, slowly faded. Laughter was no longer used as a weapon to belittle ambition but as a means to celebrate creativity and cleverness. Conversations carried a new tone, one of respect, curiosity, and encouragement. Villagers began to understand that the strength of imagination, insight, and courage lay not only in individual achievement but in its ability to inspire collective growth. Nandi's quiet perseverance had shown them that visionary thinking could coexist with community, that ambition did not need to be feared, and that those who dare to dream can elevate everyone around them. As weeks turned into months, the village blossomed with energy, ideas, and possibilities. Nandi's influence, once subtle and underestimated, became woven into the cultural fabric. Children were told stories of her courage, her foresight, and the nights when dreams became reality. Parents and mentors used her example to instill resilience, curiosity, and bravery in the next generation. The lesson was clear: vision is strength, courage is power, and nurturing ambition transforms communities. By embracing imagination and insight, the village had not only honored Nandi's journey but also redefined its identity. It became a place where dreams mattered, where courage was respected, and where wisdom and ambition walked hand in hand. The culture of fear and mockery had been replaced with one of encouragement and possibility, ensuring that Nandi's legacy would guide generations to come. The sun had just begun to rise over the rolling hills that cradled Nandi's village, casting a golden glow over the small, tightly knit community. The morning air was crisp and carried the sense of earth and growing crops, yet beneath the ordinary tranquility lay a subtle shift, a change born from the courage and persistence of a single young woman. Nandi, once laughed at and dismissed, now walked among the villagers with a quiet confidence that radiated purpose. Her dreams, once the subject of ridicule, had become the seed of transformation, reshaping not only her life but the very heart of the village. From the earliest years, Nandi had been different. Her mind reached beyond the boundaries of the immediate, the practical, and the expected. She envisioned possibilities others could not imagine, saw connections and opportunities hidden from those who only cared for routine, and dared to dream of a future that challenged the limits imposed by tradition. In her youth, these qualities brought laughter, whispers, and sometimes cruel jokes. Villagers had labeled her imagination as folly, her vision as naive. Family members admonished her for wasting time with unrealistic ideas. Yet Nandi did not retreat. Instead, she nurtured her visions quietly, giving them strength and form in secret journals, sketches, and long contemplative walks beneath the stars. Each idea, each hope, grew resilient in the face of scorn. The first sign that her dreams carried power came on an otherwise ordinary evening when subtle anomalies began to ripple through the village. Lights flickered across the tree canopies in the forest, animals behaved strangely, and the wind carried murmurs that seemed almost deliberate. At first, villagers dismissed these occurrences as coincidence, superstition, or the whims of nature. Nandi, however, recognized patterns that confirmed the truth of her visions. She began to act carefully, using these signs to prepare the community, albeit silently, with deliberate discretion. Through subtle actions, gentle guidance, and a growing network of quiet supporters who had once admired her from afar, she started to build awareness, even before she fully revealed the depth of her insight. The night of revelation marked a turning point. It arrived with an air of anticipation, the forest and fields seeming to hold their breath as the signs she had nurtured aligned with the visions she had carried for years. Flames danced unnaturally in village lanterns, shadows moved with intent, and whispers floated on the wind. Villagers who had mocked her watched in astonishment as Nandi's carefully cultivated understanding of patterns, people, and nature manifested into undeniable proof of her foresight. Her dreams were no longer private. They spoke to everyone, their truth unassailable. Shock replaced derision and awe replaced laughter. In that night, Nandi's imagination became reality, leaving the village no choice but to confront the truth of their skepticism. In the aftermath, Nandi's influence continued to grow. Those who had quietly believed in her dreams or admired her courage stepped forward, forming alliances that reinforced the village's newfound respect for imagination, insight, and ambition. Together they began to reshape the cultural landscape. Children were encouraged to explore, experiment, and dream boldly. Traditional elders, initially hesitant, observed the tangible benefits of Nandi's visions: improved crop planning, innovative solutions to disputes, and a renewed sense of hope and energy among the people. The village's social fabric, once tightly bound by rigid adherence to convention, began to stretch, expand, and strengthen under the infusion of creativity and bold thinking. For those who had once mocked Nandi, the transformation was jarring. Their doubts and ridicule, once sources of pride or humor, became burdens of shame and regret. Authority figures and skeptics discovered that influence and respect were no longer won through conformity and scorn but through integrity, vision, and courage. Attempts to reclaim old dominance met resistance, and the village increasingly turned to Nandi for guidance, insight, and inspiration. Her ability to dream had revealed hidden fears, illuminated weaknesses, and shifted power from those who clung to rigid control to those who dared to embrace possibility. Nandi's personal journey mirrored the broader transformation of the village. She had walked the path from scorned dreamer to celebrated visionary, learning patience, discernment, and the quiet art of influencing without coercion. Her methods were subtle but profound. A carefully placed suggestion here, a pattern observed there, and always, a readiness to act when the moment aligned with her vision. She taught the village that true power lies not in dominance but in foresight, empathy, and courage. The courage to act on one's dreams even when the world laughs. Over time, her legacy solidified. The lessons of her journey became interwoven with daily life. Parents encouraged imagination alongside responsibility, teachers nurtured vision alongside discipline, and children grew up knowing that their aspirations were valid and valuable. Nandi's story became a cornerstone of the community's identity, a tale not just of individual triumph, but of collective transformation. Mocking ambition hides the fear of what one cannot achieve, elders would tell the young, recounting the nights when the village first witnessed the power of a dream realized. Nandi herself remained humble yet unwavering. She understood that the true measure of her achievement was not in personal recognition but in the enduring impact her courage had on the people around her. Her dreams had reshaped attitudes, inspired generations, and infused the village with a newfound respect for creativity, insight, and vision. What had once been considered folly had become wisdom, and what had once been mocked had become celebrated. Generations grew up with her story as a guiding principle. Children dared to dream boldly, knowing that their visions could shape reality. Young adults learned the value of courage, persistence, and quiet determination. The village flourished as a place where imagination and insight were not feared but cherished, where innovation was celebrated, and where the legacy of Nandi, the woman who dreamed, lived on. In the end, Nandi's life became a testament to the transformative power of dreams. Her visions, once dismissed, had proven irresistible in their impact, showing that courage and foresight could overcome skepticism and fear. Through her example, the village learned that ambition is not a threat, but a seed of possibility, capable of reshaping societies, nurturing growth, and inspiring hope across generations. Nandi, the woman who dared to dream, had become immortal, not through magic or force, but through the enduring power of her vision, the courage to act, and the wisdom to guide others to see beyond their own limitations. Her story echoed through time, a living lesson, that the boldness to imagine and pursue one's dreams carries the potential to change the world, and that those who dare to dream are the ones who leave a lasting legacy.